The simulacrum is never what hides the truth. It is the truth that hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true. Postmodernist Jean Baudrillard introduces his book Simulacra and Simulation with this quote in order to explain his thesis that although simulacra is not the original truth, it is the reality of the present. He argues that some truths are lost through repetition and simulation, where they turned into a simulacra. The original no longer exists. The extreme result of simulacra is the hyperreal. The simulation becomes indistinguishable from reality. We applied this theory to consider whether or not the 21st century only has access to a hyperreal Elvis through phenomena such as impersonators and commodification as a result of capitalism. The true Elvis is lost and masked by the exaggeration and manipulation of parts of his personality. For example, Elvis the hillbilly, Elvis the sex icon, or Elvis the face of white trash. Large corporate businesses have taken advantage of these multiple faces of Elvis in order to appeal to multiple audiences and maximize profits. Elvis's many different personas is unarguably one of the main reasons behind his controversial success during the 50s and 60s. Audiences during his time were able to choose the way in which they perceived Elvis. For example, real hillbillies identified with him as a hillbilly, whereas embittered Native Americans could label him as the white man that stole black culture. Regardless of whom Elvis may or may not have been, his popularity was growing. The capitalist machine could latch onto this multi-faced character and reproduce him in as many different ways as necessary. For example, selling Elvis as Latinized in Mexico and a samurai in parts of Japan. His heritage and upbringing made him relatable to white America, but the genre of his music was doing, which was mainly associated with black music, initiated a large African American fan base. Elvis became a commodity. The need for Elvis's records and merchandise was at such a high demand that simulacrum was unavoidable. This control that everyone apart from Elvis had over Elvis gave his legacy mythical qualities and distracts from his contribution to rock and roll, as well as his own ideologies. He has become concreted in associations with the ideals of the 50s nuclear family, that his fans ultimately manipulated his voice and influenced to cast judgment according to these ideals, when in fact we could never know what he actually would have reacted to certain things. Some of the black community felt that Elvis stole their identity for himself, even though he accredited B.B. King and Bill Haley for their influence and was the visionary for injecting black culture into the mainstream media of the 20th century. However, it was most likely that the fact he was white was one of the major driving forces of his success.
Commodification and the hyperreal are hand in glove. Elvis is not just more of an image than a person. He is all image and no person. First, in his inflated persona, and second, in death. Elvis is still real because of the proliferation of commodities, that is, in short, products, given value through prestige and status over material value or the effort required to create them. Hence we see Elvis impersonators in 50s diners with plastic Elvis and an entire city ingratiated into American decadence. Where departed Elvis still wears the crown, he is not departed at all but spread multitudinous, and now bears white trash revisions and a tarnished mystique. One need only pervade through a search engine the most famous people ever, and we see that mass stardom is a distinctly American and non-meritocratic affair. The proliferation of celebrities abroad, for example. Note how little we know of Bollywood celebrities, or Chinese, even though democratically by population they would in theory constitute greater world fame. It is the American century with Elvis at helm, in the heights of the up-pulse post-war era, that celebrity became fashion, when America was virile and expanding with a more cultural than military domino effect. This exposes stardom to be an arguably misconceived social sanction. Film idols are not something to be dreamed about, they are the dreams, says Baudrillard. So befits the American ideology of pursuing an Enlightenment sense property or fulfillment, and in the modern sense, ownership. These notions are infectious. We were assimilated into what by contemporary fashion would be the world as it is today, a stars and stripes hegemony. It is a narrative of history that gives reality, and when history fact becomes entwined with the stuff of legend or myth, over substance, we have a false evaluation. Marx and Engels expose a superficial evaluation of worth over value, commodification or cultural fetishizement then, is the representation, or rather misrepresentation, of little value as a significantly valuable. The actual value is not present, but the representation, or copy of a copy of it is. Thus we have hyperreal commodification of the actual indistinctive material object, ordinary Elvis, belied as exceptional and quasi-abstract, the extraordinary hillbilly cat Elvis, of film star rock icon fame. Image appeal is associated to social privileges, or in Elvis's rock and roll, the socially contrary, creating a new unique social privilege.
One trip or another, we met Elvis. It was one of the highlights of our visit.
Mohair Sam, all evening, he had it on jukebox. He just played it like endlessly. That was like the record of the moment for him. So it was great to see, he's a music fan. You know, he's not just, because that was one of our big records at the moment too.
The teenager and a resurgence of American liberalism in the markedly conservative era. This cultural commodification is neoliberal capitalist. That we can win if you play the game, and if you do not play, you do not appear to exist. You are unrepresented, or underrepresented. The end of times, as Zizek says, is not a literal apocalypse, but ossification and resigned, benign even acceptance of things as they are. To Précy Baudrillard, we have copies of copies with no original. Nevertheless, Elvis was alive. The original did exist, but as with Plato speaking of a bed and the unachievable, ergo ever desirable bedness that subsumes it, the same is true of Elvis. His inflated Elvisness, as it were, could never be matched by the man. He over-signified to excess, meant so much with so little, had value not based on fact, but in social and capitalistic profit bourgeoisie sanction over reality. For who are the evaluators? The ruling class, especially in the 50s tight-knit white veneered nuclear family value set. For it is in bourgeoisie interest for us to judge our fellows by their material, for the bourgeoisie always win this contest. What is real, then, is not only what is natural, as with Enlightenment rhetoric, but technological and, yes, socio-economic. This hyperreal is, to use technological influence to corroborate, a reality 2.0, a supposedly improved, up-to-date version. Imitations by their very matter are adaptive. Elvis is more of a nostalgic reverie and historical cultural signpost now than he would be a youth icon in 50s configuration. An apt idiom is the stuff of legend. The stuff of the vagary of historicism of his role will ever be written in the critique-driven age dominated the postmodern.
In 2015, it is still possible to watch a live Elvis performance, even though the man himself is dead. Russian theorist Mikhail Bakhtin coins the term carnivalesque to describe an instance where society disregards social restraints for a period of time. During this period, people can be seen to act outside of social norms in a manner which is usually deemed as foolish or inappropriate, such as during contests like the Ultimate Elvis Tribute Contest. According to Spiegel, fans of Elvis Presley see Elvis impersonator concerts as a continuity of tradition. They are brought together through this common sense of the American past. Such contests ensure that the most realistic performer is found, however, regardless of how well the winner represents the original, he is still only a mere simulacrum, and the only Elvis modern society has access to. In addition to this, anyone younger than age 38 wouldn't have seen the original Elvis in the first place. Only recorded footage and media representations. Baudrillard argues that since we are living in an era of mass media, it is almost impossible to experience the real or original of anything. Everything we see is some sort of repeat, copy, or reproduction. The idea of the real versus the fake no longer exists since there is no distinguishable feature between the two. Since there is usually a minimum age requirement of 18 years old to enter such contests, as a society we are facilitating this hyperreal Elvis and the cycle of simulacrum. To support Baudrillard's argument, we put little value on Elvis as a person and more so on him as an icon, which is why Elvis Presley is just as known and enjoyed now, if not more so, than he was when he was in existence. We, as a society, only have access to a revised Elvis, an Elvis that has been produced and reproduced so many times since his legacy began that the modern Elvis that we have access to today is irrefutably different from the original. As Baudrillard finds, several truths are lost during the transition from real to simulacra. The end result is the hyperreal. Arguing whether or not this hyperreal figure is better or worse than the first is highly problematic. However, it is the only form of Elvis that we have access to.